Tonight, paying the price. Late word of a settlement between United Airlines and that passenger violently dragged off a plane. As we sit down exclusively with United's CEO, what he says is to blame and what changes are on the way. Cop-killer standoff, a state trooper gunned down, and a 20-hour drama. SWAT teams blow the suspect's house wide open as he comes out shooting. American special ops soldiers killed in a raid on ISIS in Afghanistan. 2 dead, another wounded. What happened? TV controversy, a new series about a fictional teenage girl and the 13 reasons why she took her own life. Some schools sounding the alarm, accusing the series of glamorizing suicide. And what's the story? An inspiring young man, why so many kids are clamoring to join his club. Nightly News begins right now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. Possibly no recent story has generated the level of universal outrage quite like the video of a bloodied man being dragged from his airplane seat. Now there's late word that a settlement has been reached between United Airlines and that passenger, Kentucky Dr. David Dow, who was injured after being forcibly removed from a United plane when he refused to give up his seat to a traveling airline crew member. The settlement deal for an undisclosed sum was announced on the same day United released an internal report on the April 9th incident and announced a series of changes to help prevent it from happening again. In an exclusive interview with NBC News, United CEO Oscar Munoz described to me the failures that failed Dr. Dow.
I don't wish any lower point than this on anyone in the world.
Oscar Munoz hoping this low point will also turn out to be United's turning point. With what it calls an amicable resolution of an unfortunate incident, the airline settling with Dr. David Dow as it confronts its mistakes and promises change, releasing an internal report listing its failures that day, calling law enforcement despite the fact there was no security threat, booking an off-duty flight crew at the last minute aboard an already oversold plane, and not offering enough compensation to entice passengers to give up their seats. You needed to get that crew on that airplane to cover another flight. Looking back, was there another way? Could you have hired cars? Were there solutions that would have avoided what we saw?
Absolutely, and that's the common sense process that I have failed our company with providing. We should have done that immediately. It just wasn't embedded in the policies and procedures.
Procedures the airline says will change. More training for difficult situations. New teams focus on providing agents with creative solutions. Fewer overbooked flights and raising compensation for those willing to take a later flight up to $10,000. Could more compensation have avoided this in this case?
You know, it's hard to say. I think the combination of financial recompense plus how do I get to where I want to go? That's the thing that we're going to put the customer at the center of everything we do.
Isn't customer service, putting the customer first, isn't that a given?
It is. We make sure 500,000 people every single day get to somewhere safely. When you have a complicated process like that, the operational mindset becomes sort of front and center. And we forget sometimes that the people you're carrying are human and have interest and have desires.
Munoz blames the episode on what he calls a system failure. However, as a result, he will no longer gain the title of chairman next year as planned. His decision, he says.
I don't think it's the right time, A. And B, I need to provide, as I say sorry, there has to be actions of proof that I am indeed sorry.
You're saying that was your call?
Yes.
Since the United incident, a series of airline passenger horror stories have grabbed the headlines. And you looked on TV and saw the American Airlines incident with a stroller and a flight attendant. What did you think?
The industry is getting a black eye. And I think and again, I'm not defending any issues whatsoever other than a lot of great things happen in all the airline industry across the world. You've caught us, all of us, at a bad moment to this degree. And so I felt sorry. I know them well. I know their views on life.
But it's forging a new culture at United that Munoz is committed to, starting with Dr. Dow.
We breached public trust, and a serious breach, and we're profoundly sorry for that.
Dr. Dow's lawyer tonight applauding United's moves and calling his client an unintended champion for the adoption of the changes. In Delaware, flags are at half-staff for a state trooper gunned down by a suspect who then held police in a 20-hour standoff. SWAT teams used explosives to blow open the suspect's house before he finally came out shooting this morning. Tonight, with the state in mourning, investigators still don't have a motive. Here's NBC's Tom Costello.
In a quiet Delaware suburb, a violent night of gunfire and explosives after a standoff with a cop killer. It started less than 24 hours earlier at a convenience store when State Trooper Stephen Ballard approached a suspicious vehicle. Police say that's when the passenger, 26-year-old Burjan Seeley, jumped out, pulled a gun, and began shooting. As Trooper Ballard lay wounded on the ground, Seeley approached and executed him.
CPR progress. Copy, CPR progress.
Seeley then fled, barricading himself in his family's home. Overnight, SWAT teams used explosives to blow off the windows and doors, trying to coax Seeley out.
It was like 5 shots in succession, like 5 shots, a break, and then 5 more shots.
At 9:17 this morning, Seeley came out shooting and was shot and killed himself. Neighbors say Burjan Seeley and his family kept to themselves.
They kind of stuck to themselves. We never saw them outside or anything.
The family, you never saw the family?
No.
Outside State Police Troop 2, the flags are at half-staff. Black bunting draped over Trooper Ballard's patrol car. An 8-year veteran, he was married with a stepdaughter.
The actions of Stephen yesterday exemplified the dedication.
Today, fellow officers and the governor choked back tears.
He leaves behind his lovely wife, Louise, a daughter, and a loving family, and scores of friends.
Investigators say they don't know why Trooper Ballard stopped the car, though Burjan Seeley had a history of drug and weapons arrests. Tonight at the convenience store, police tape and flowers for a fallen officer. Tonight, Trooper Ballard's cruiser remains parked in front of the barracks here, and bunting remains there. People have been coming all day, bringing food and flowers, even money for his family. He is the first trooper in Delaware to die in the line of duty since 2004. Nationwide this year, the 13th officer shot and killed on the line of duty. Lester?
Tom Costello in Delaware tonight. Thank you. Back in the headlines, President Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. The Pentagon's top watchdog has now launched an investigation into Flynn, who was already the subject of FBI and congressional probes into his ties to Russia. Flynn was fired 23 days into the job for misleading Vice President Mike Pence about his conversations with Russia's ambassador. NBC's Andrea Mitchell has new details.
Tonight, the firestorm growing over ousted National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, now being investigated by the Pentagon's Inspector General for accepting foreign payments without prior approval. Congressional Democrats unleashing their sharpest words yet at the White House for refusing to turn over all documents on Flynn to them.
I honestly do not understand why the White House is covering up for Michael Flynn. I don't get it. After the president fired him.
So the Democrats released Pentagon documents showing the Defense Intelligence Agency warned Flynn when he retired he needed permission to take money from foreign governments. At issue, Flynn receiving $45,000 for a speech plus expenses with Vladimir Putin in Russia in 2015, and more than $500,000 lobbying for Turkey in 2016.
We have no evidence, zilch, that he obtained permission from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of State to accept any foreign government payments.
The White House saying the Pentagon was in charge of vetting Flynn.
If they think that there's wrongdoing, then the department's Inspector General should look into that.
But NBC News has learned from sources close to the investigation the Trump transition and the White House did its own background check on Flynn and hired him anyway.
Working on behalf of foreign governments getting paid may not be unlawful, but if you don't disclose it, investigators want to know, why are you hiding this information? Perhaps you've been compromised.
And Republican Oversight Chairman Jason Chaffetz tonight asking the Army to weigh in on whether Flynn broke the law. Flynn's lawyers saying that Flynn notified the Pentagon of his trip to Russia, but investigators say he never told them he was being paid. Lester?
Andrea Mitchell, thanks. Turning overseas now, and a tragic day for American forces fighting ISIS. 2 U.S. Special Operations troops were killed in a battle against ISIS fighters in the same area where the U.S. dropped a massive bomb earlier this month. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols has details.
The fierce firefight happening overnight. U.S. Special Operations Forces joined by the Afghan army attacking ISIS insurgents, killing around 40. But in the battle, 2 U.S. special operators were wounded, medevaced out alive, but later died. A third was grazed by a bullet, staying on the battlefield. All of it happening in the same ISIS stronghold in eastern Afghanistan, where the U.S. dropped a 21,000-pound explosive, the so-called mother of all bombs, 2 weeks ago, collapsing terrorist tunnels and caves. Afghan officials say roughly 100 ISIS combatants were killed by the bomb, but Defense Secretary Jim Mattis claiming not to care about numbers.
Frankly, digging into tunnels to count dead bodies is probably not a good use of our troops' time.
Tonight, there are more than 20 extremist organizations in the region, according to U.S. officials, including ISIS and the Taliban.
I don't see how Afghanistan doesn't devolve further into endless civil war.
The top commander in Afghanistan wants to add a few thousand more U.S. troops to the already 8,400 in country. But neither Secretary Mattis nor President Trump has publicly indicated if they agree. Lester?
Hans Nichols of the Pentagon, thanks. There are a flood of new questions tonight about President Trump's new tax plan. To be specific, what's in it and how will it affect millions of American families? The Trump administration has provided an outline, but not many details so far. NBC's Peter Alexander has more on that.
The president's plan to overhaul 70,000 pages of federal tax laws so far boiling down to barely 200 words. Critics say it's a PR pitch, not a proposal.
It is a plan to lower President Trump's taxes, the taxes of his cabinet, and people as wealthy as they are.
The biggest winner, according to most tax analysts, the rich. Their tax rate dropping nearly 5%. And the White House pushing to abolish the alternative minimum tax, the death tax, and slash the capital gains tax on investments, all benefiting the wealthy. Low-income Americans could pay no tax, at least for their first $24,000 of income, with a doubling of the standard deduction for couples. But today, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is refusing to guarantee middle-class families won't pay more.
I can't make any guarantees until this thing is done and on the president's desk, but I can tell you that's our #1 objective in this.
And deflecting questions about how this blueprint would balloon the deficit. President Trump hasn't given any details about how his 3 proposed personal tax brackets, 10, 25, and 35%, would apply to different income levels. He said tax benefits for saving and 401k plans would be untouched, and he'd eliminate all deductions except charitable contributions and mortgage interest. But if you're renting like 35% of U.S. households, that tax break doesn't save you a dime.
The argument in favor of this proposal is that it'll spur consumer and business activity. It'll cause people to spend more money. It'll cause businesses to employ more people. But the reality is that doesn't seem to be plausible.
Tonight, the president also says he's tackling one of his signature campaign issues on trade, announcing that he'll renegotiate NAFTA. President Trump insisting he was just days away from withdrawing from the deal altogether before receiving calls from the leaders of Mexico and Canada, who urged him not to tear it up. Lester?
All right, Peter Alexander at the White House tonight. Thank you. Now to Berkeley, California, where new protests are breaking out tonight, a day after conservative pundit Ann Coulter's plan to speak at UC Berkeley was abruptly canceled. The university said it feared another round of violent protests, with Coulter claiming she may go to the campus anyway. NBC national correspondent Miguel Almaguer is there.
Today in Berkeley, protests are spilling into the streets, but tonight many fear violence will erupt. The extreme left and right squaring off in bloody demonstrations in recent weeks, the kind of confrontation UC Berkeley was hoping to avoid, canceling the speech scheduled for today by conservative firebrand Ann Coulter.
Her not showing up sets a dangerous precedent that violence works.
With Coulter speaking in Modesto tomorrow, the university is still worried their campus will be turned into a battlefield. In February, there were fires and fights after alt-right icon Milo Yiannopoulos had his speech canceled.
We have 2 commitments which are in tension right now. One is to the First Amendment and the other one is to the safety of our students.
Many of the protesters aren't students. Both sides of this heated debate critical. Coulter was silenced.
I'm tired of seeing people show up and stifle free speech.
Police have been told some of the extremists arriving here could be carrying weapons, clubs, bags of rocks, even hammers. Arrests have already been made.
Tonight on the streets of Berkeley, unrest over the silence of free speech. The question now, at